Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Let's talk about some of the big portal news and notes from the course of this weekend. First of all, let's talk about some of the players that have entered. Now, admittedly, some of these guys kind of overlap with the conversation about Mark Pope coming to Kentucky, but not everybody will have watched that part. Some are coming in for the portal stuff. So I want to talk about the players that have entered the portal over the last couple days. And I think the big one to start with, Zvonimir Ivisic, Big Z from the University of Kentucky. So if you're just looking at a stat sheet on Big Z, it goes without saying, like, stats don't blow you away, okay? He averaged 5.5 points, 3.5 boards, and 1.3 blocks in just 11 minutes per game. But any Kentucky fan is here to tell you, that dude's a baller, and he got really good as time went on. Now, first of all, why were the stats so low? Keep in mind, he didn't even get admitted to school until like September, October. Comes late. Then he's not eligible. He did not play. He only played a total of 15 games. Did not play in any games until that Georgia game in late January, okay? So it was hard figuring out how to implement him, how to get him involved, this and that. Obviously, the Georgia game was probably the best game he played. 13 points, 5 of 7 from the field, 3 of 4 3-point shooting. But I'm here to tell you, this kid is a really talented player. And I think what stands out to me is that he's really good on both ends of the floor. Now, you got to, sometimes it was a little physical for him. Sometimes he was a step slow, but he's so big, 7'1", 7'2", so athletic. And the ability to block shots, in my opinion, was a game changer. Had 4 block shots in the win over Alabama, 3 in that big win against Mississippi State, 3 in that SEC tournament loss to Texas A&M. And the big question is, what does Big Z decide to do? The obvious answer, by the way, we're recording here Sunday at about 8 p.m. Eastern time. So if this is old news by the time you listen, don't yell at Torres. Don't be mad at Torres. I am just telling you in real time what is going on, okay? And so I bring it up because Big Z, in my opinion, producer Matt, I love the graphic there. Thank you so much. He is, of course, that 7-foot kid who played at Kentucky. Big Z, in my opinion, listen, you'd have to think that Arkansas is the favorite, right? And Kentucky fans, I know you're going to be mad. I know you're going to get whatever. But at the end of the day, listen, Calipari brought him over. Calipari fought for him. Calipari went to war for him, and he is probably pretty loyal to John Calipari. Now, I will say, if I'm Mark Pope, right along Reed Shepherd and right along DJ Wagner, that is a guy that you have to go after if you're Mark Pope. You have to make this kid feel wanted. You have to show him what you can do for him in your system. And so I'll be fascinated to see. Listen, I could be wrong. I have no super intel on this one. But this doesn't strike me as the kind of kid that's going to take a visit to Washington or take a visit to Texas or take a visit to UConn. Like, I think it's going to be either Arkansas or a return to Kentucky or potentially a return overseas. My guess is it's Arkansas early. And if he decides to go, I just think it's a loyalty to Calipari. You can like it. You cannot like it. I just think that's a reality. A couple other interesting names that enter the portal. Listen, I think we got to talk when we talk about interesting names that enter the portal this weekend. I think we got to talk about some of the guys that entered from Mark Pope's team at BYU. Dallin Hall, we talked about during the Mark Pope segment. Really good college basketball player. Now, he's young. He's only a sophomore. Played the last 2 years at BYU. Averaged 9 points, 5 assists, and 36% from the three-point line. Found it very interesting that essentially Friday morning, the second that Mark Pope announced that he was leaving or that it was reported that he was leaving, I don't even know if it was official at that point. At that point, Mark Pope, this kid entered the portal. And so you'd have to think that kid is probably going to follow Mark Pope. And you talk about just a great piece to start out with if you're the Kentucky Wildcats. 9 points per game, as I said, 5 assists per game. Not a point guard, but can pass, dribble, cut, shoot, whatever. And just a guy that I think would really be embraced by that fan base. Smart, high IQ basketball player. He did enter the portal right after Mark Pope decided to leave. And so my guess would be that Kentucky is probably the favorite to land him. Thought it was interesting. Ali Khalifa, who of course was also another player that played for Mark Pope at BYU, entered the portal a few hours after Mark Pope left. Now, we talked about Ali Khalifa a minute ago. This is not a guy to bring in to play 36 minutes a night in the SEC, okay? But just because you're not a starter doesn't mean that you don't have insane value. And he's a kid that, in my opinion, listen, again, if you're bringing him in to play 18 to 20 minutes as the backup center in a system that he is comfortable in a system that he thrived in, he's got a chance to be really good for the Kentucky Wildcats next year if he decides to come. Average 5.5 points per game, 4 assists per game in just 19 minutes of game action, okay? So you talk about a guy averaged 4 assists in under 20 minutes of play. Not great at math, but that extrapolates out to an 8 assists per 40 minutes ratio if you extrapolate it out to 40 minutes. Big kid, not a great athlete, but just a great passer. He has fouls to give in the paint. And I think he would be a fan favorite at Kentucky if he ends up going. Again, dime dropper, bucket getter, puts guys in position to succeed. Great passer. So we'll see what happens from there. Couple visits happened this weekend that I think are at least worth discussing very quickly. Jacob Petruzzi asked for any UConn updates. Well, as of 8 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday, unless I missed something, there is no official word on this, but UConn did have a visitor this weekend, Terrace Reed Jr., the center from the University of Michigan, okay? Terrace Reed Jr., center from the University of Michigan. This past season, he did average about 9 points per game, 7.5 boards per game, 1.4 blocks per game as well. So UConn obviously is going to need a big man. Donovan Clingan is gone. And I'll be curious. Obviously Dan Hurley probably won't have any media availability anytime soon, but I'd be curious how Dan Hurley views this kid. Does UConn plan to keep Samson Johnson coming off the bench? Samson Johnson, of course, was the big guy, the backup to Donovan Clingan. Are they recruiting a starting center? Are they recruiting a backup to Samson Johnson? Or are they telling Samson Johnson, hey, you're 6'10", dude, but you're super athletic. Let's work on some of your perimeter skills, and let's make you a 4-5 man that can play both. Either way, Terrace Reed, listen, I don't think he's super the best player that's ever entered the portal, but you average 9 and 7 in the Big Ten, you're doing something right. He had some very big games, especially late in the year, 12 and 8 in the final game of the season for Michigan, where they lost to Penn State in the Big Ten tournament. Big kid, not super athletic, but he's tough. He's physical, kind of guy that you need in the Big East. You're obviously never going to find a Donovan Clingan replacement, but I'd be fascinated to see, is this dude a real, are we bringing him in if we're UConn to start him? Are we bringing him in to back up Samson Johnson? Is it going to be a two-headed monster? Thing that'll be really interesting on Terrace Reed, remember, he was visiting this weekend, which means that he attended a national championship parade as a member of the, as an official visitor to UConn. UConn probably has about 3 spots to fill via the portal. One is clearly a big guy, and he is clearly a priority. A couple other visits from this weekend. Well, really just one more that stood out. Cade Tyson, one of the best 3-point shooters in college basketball, visited Tennessee this weekend and will visit North Carolina next week. And he played at Belmont, 16 points per game, 46% from 3. As I record, he has not committed. We'll see if anything changes. But the thing that stands out about him, again, he was only a sophomore, 6'7". His brother Hunter Tyson actually plays in the NBA, but elite 3-point shooter. And what I was thinking about with this kid is, Rick Barnes pursuing him. One, does feel like a Dalton Connect, replacement. But 2, I do wonder how much Rick Barnes enjoyed having that dude that could just go get buckets, right? Almost reminded me of the Dan Hurley situation, where Dan Hurley, until about 2-3 years ago, he emphasized toughness and rebounding and defense and this and that. And then about 2 off seasons ago, he emphasized scoring. And he said, you know what, we could play tough defense and also score. And I wonder if Rick Barnes was like, you know what? It's nice not having to win every game 62-58. So Cade Tyson is a name to know. He visits Carolina next weekend. It's interesting. Carolina has been pretty quiet on the portal front. They have a really good freshman class coming in with Ian Jackson and with Drake Powell. I suspect the Elliott Cadeaus, the Jalen Washingtons will be back, so they don't need a ton necessarily, but Cade Tyson will be great for them, and it appears as though he's visiting. Really quickly, a couple commits before we get out of here. The one that stood out from the weekend, how about my boy Mike effing Woodson? Mike effing Woodson. Mike effing Woodson going out and getting what I believe to be one of the best guards in the transfer portal, Miles Rice, who just finished his freshman year at Washington State. And I use freshman year loosely because a very unique story on Miles Rice. He is actually a third year freshman, in a very unique circumstance. Freshman year, he's from the South, goes out to Washington State, decides to redshirt in the 2021-2022 season. His sophomore year, this is the scary part, diagnosed with leukemia. Incredibly, makes a full recovery, knock on wood, God's blessings, all that. Healthy, comes back to basketball this year and ends up winning the Pac-12 Freshman of the Year this year. Averaged 14.8 points per game, 3.8 assists, almost 2 steals per game. He's a really good college basketball player. Okay, I don't know if he's an NBA player, but he's 6'3", ball in his hands, very comfortable, gets stuff set up. And the thing I'd say from the Indiana perspective, I think he's kind of the anti-Xavier Johnson. Xavier Johnson was Indiana's point guard the last few years, and there was a lot of highs and a lot of lows. Xavier Johnson was like this elite plus athlete, but there were moments where it's just like, what are you doing? Too many turnovers, too many bad shots, not a great shooter. If you're Xavier Johnson, not a knock, just a reality. This guy's kind of the exact opposite. Smart, heady, doesn't beat himself. Smart system. Remember, he played for Kyle Smith, who's a great coach now at Stanford. This is a big recruiting win for Indiana. Now, the one knock, I will readily admit, Indiana was one of the worst three-point shooting teams this past year. 27% three-point shooter. He was not great, but the one thing I'll say, listen, I'm not an expert on, shooting form and all that. I mean, I know what I know, but I'm not a workout guru or anything. He had a shot where it wasn't like crooked. It wasn't like Lonzo Ball didn't know what he was doing. Like, no. He can shoot the ball. He just didn't shoot it that well this year. I think he's going to be really good. What will be interesting from the Indiana perspective, there are 2 other kids right now that are really good players that are both projected to be potential Indiana commits. Cannon Carlisle, true freshman last year at Stanford. He had a wild story. So he played this past year at Stanford. Stanford's admissions is just insane. So I kind of knew somebody that was at Stanford that was with him. And first of all, they believe this kid's an NBA player. So he did not play for Stanford this year until the middle of December. And what was crazy about it was he got admitted to school. He got like a C in summer school, and the school themselves pulled him out of competition. Basically said, we need you to prove that you can focus on the academics. That's how crazy things are at Stanford. He comes back as a true freshman in the Pac-12, averages 11.5 points per game. He had one game, by the way, early on. He went for 28 against Arizona, 6 of 8 from 3. Not a great three-point shooter like Miles Rice, but if you can get him, that is an NBA-level type talent, okay? That is an NBA-level type talent in Cannon Carlisle, and if Indiana gets him, I'm here to tell you, listen, they'll be a little bit small. They won't be perfect, not great. Those are 2 all Big Ten kind of guys. If you can get Cannon Carlisle, Miles Rice committed. Oh, by the way, Umar Ballo, the center from Arizona, is also reportedly leaning towards Indiana. May take a few visits. Again, this is all in the moment. But you get those 3. That is a heck of a start to next year's team. Keep in mind, they also have Mackenzie Mbako. Finally, really quickly, producer Matt just dropped this in my notes here. Tremont Mark leaving Arkansas to go to Texas. So Tremont Mark played a couple years at Houston, was really good at Houston. Goes to Arkansas this year, averages 16 points per game. He was probably their most consistent player, but he has decided to return home to Texas. Big win for Texas. Listen, one thing I thought Texas lacked this past year was really size at the guard position. Had Max Abmas, had Tyrese Hunter, two smaller guys. And you needed size at that position. You get size at that position in Tremont Mark. Now, he was inconsistent, up and down, had some injury stuff, but really good player. I mean, I'm talking about one of the best big guards in college basketball. He's got winning experience, went to Houston, had success there. And listen, I don't blame him. Coach Cal is starting new. Coach Cal is probably going to bring in some freshmen. And at this point, he's deciding to start fresh over as well. I think he has a chance to be he'd be an all SEC type player, because remember, Texas is going to the Big 12 next year, or going from the Big 12 to the SEC. But Tremont Mark, the other name that you need to know in the portal.